What's happening, hardscapers? This is episode 290 of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. And on today's episode, we're joined by Chris Lux. He is a sales process and management consultant, and we go through a sales deep dive here and even ask him a little bit of questions about my sales process and how I can go about improving that. And I got a lot out of it, and I hope that you do here today. It never hurts to take a look at your sales process and see where you can improve, which is what I'm focusing on this off season here as well. But before we get into today's episode, we want to thank our sponsors, Cycle CPA. And if you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. Knowledge Tree Consulting. If you are looking for somebody to help you in your business, I would highly recommend Knowledge Tree Consulting. They are efficiency consultants in our industry, and you've heard them on the podcast multiple times before. George and Peter of Oriole Landscaping, and George a couple of other times talking about various topics, and we'll definitely have George on in the future to talk more. But you can learn more about them at knowledgetreeconsulting.com. And thank you to Mosier for jumping on board to sponsor the How to Hardscape podcast. I just got my hands on a Mosier 2 Pro, and I'll be using it to measure, draw, calculate areas, perimeters, volume, elevations, and lay out the entire project on my device and for estimating and design process. And if you're looking for a software to dive into this off season, check out the How to Hardscape headquarters software, where we help you budget, estimate job costs, time track, schedule, manage your employees, and even create your own safety courses or training and onboarding courses, or use our preloaded hardscape installation courses to train and onboard your employees. If you want more information on that, you can check out all of the features and videos with the features at hthheadquarters.com. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Chris. Today, we're joined by Chris Lux. He is a sales process and management consultant. And Chris, I actually got introduced to you by George Uvari, who our listeners should know. He's been on the podcast at least 3 times now. And so, Chris, I'm excited to get to know a little bit more about you. Thanks for joining us here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm excited about it too. And, if your listeners don't know George, they certainly should. Add a little spice to life.
Chris, let's get to know a little bit more about you yourself. I'd love to know a little bit more about you, your background, and getting into sales and everything like that. But let our listeners know a little bit more about you.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you an interesting fact. I listened to my first podcast just a few months ago.
Nice.
Never got into the podcast thing. I just listened to a Harvard Business Review one, just like a leadership thing. Found it fascinating, and then here we are a couple months later, and I'm recording one. So just funny how life continues to develop in these unique ways. So about me, I didn't start off in sales. Born and raised in Philadelphia. Playing street sports, basketball, baseball on the street, football on the street. Certainly wasn't much landscape or hardscape where I grew up, just lots of concrete. Around college, my dad wanted to do something to keep his brother employed, his older brother, who was just kind of in a rough place. And he opted to buy essentially an abandoned house in the northern part of Philadelphia, a neighborhood called Fishtown. Uncle Harry was somewhat skilled in the remodeling space. He kind of did it the neighborhood way, right? Like I wouldn't bring in a home inspector at the end of the project, if you know what I mean, but it looked like he knew what he was doing. Love Uncle Harry dearly. And my dad asked if I would be interested in kind of managing the project with Harry doing the actual work. And at the time, I was in school at Temple University, which was about a mile from the project. So I'm like, this sounds great. I like to work. I'm not a huge fan of school. It's like the organization of it was a little too tight, So we did this project, and it worked out pretty well. And I got a total kick out of it. I mean, I loved it. Going through the winter, and we're rough plumbing a building with no windows in it. It just had this, it was fun. I was in my early 20s. And after that one, we did three more that it just kind of kept going. And then we built a house from the ground up right in the same neighborhood. And then we hit 2008 and real estate took a pretty big bath. So I'm stuck here. I'm pretty much wrapped up with school. I have a pickup truck, a bunch of tools. I sort of know what I'm doing. So I was like, yeah, I'll just do remodeling. So one job led to another job, led to another job. I did that for about 8 years on my own. And at the end of it, I had three full-time guys, and we were doing kitchens, baths, decks, small additions, working with some architects, working with some designers. It evolved to a decent little operation. Then my wife and I were expecting our first child. And I'm like, I'm not making very much money doing this. I mean, it's a great time. We occasionally cut out at 2:30 and get beers, but this isn't going to work for the long haul. You know what I mean? So I had reached out to a local design build remodeler and I said, I don't know what I want to do, but I really, really love working on houses and I like building things and I want to stay in this space. And the guy, Greg, wonderful guy, got back to me. It couldn't have been 15 minutes before I got an email back from this guy, which is how he is till this day, just always on. And at the bottom of my website at the time, I had these different affiliations, National Kitchen and Bath Association, National Association of the Remodeling Industry, and then I had on there National Eagle Scout Association. And when Greg got back to me saying, I looked at your website, the work looks great, it's very professional, but what really took me is this National Eagle Scout Association thing. Myself, my dad, and my brother are all Eagle Scouts. I was like, fascinating. He's like, why don't you stop in Monday? And now it's been 10 years we've been working together. So I just kind of fell into the sales space because Greg at the time was looking for a salesperson. It was him and his dad doing all the sales. His dad was 82 years old at the time. He's still kicking. He's 92. And Greg was looking to grow the business and recognize that he just can't keep doing all the sales if he's going to be the chief executive of the business. So I joined them in 2015. I was the 25th employee, and we were doing about 6 million a year in revenue in design, build, remodel. Fast forward to today, we're an 84-person company, and I have a team of 7, and we're doing about 30 million a year. So if you take like from the beginning of the story till today and you wrap it all up, I think the summary is I don't like school or like really organized formal environments, right? I like things that are always changing and I like things that are different. I could never do the same thing over and over, day in and day out. And I love this design build model. Like I like working with people they have this idea of something they want to do, but it's probably wrong. But there are problems they need to fix. And how do we get to the root of what those problems are and design a solution and then see them really happy at the end after they likely spent a whole bunch of money? I get a kick out of it. So it's just kind of coming full circle. And I like getting myself back to a place where we can work with other companies that are on the smaller side that have a good set of values and have a good culture and are looking to grow. And in a lot of cases, the salesperson is the owner operator. And there's a big challenge for an owner operator to say, I want to go from 5 million to 30 million and I'm going to do all the sales. It's just, there's just too many other things to oversee. So I think I have this unique experience that leads me to this consulting work that I'm doing now. I'm still with Hearth and love working there. The consulting stuff for me is, evening stuff, weekend stuff, just working on reviewing companies' documents and helping them fine-tune process and procedure and stuff like that. So, that's me to this day, I guess. I'm married with 2 wonderful kids and a dog that drives me crazy, but I love him too.
You probably heard my dogs earlier, so
That's why I didn't take this call at home because it would be the battle of the barking idiot dogs. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, that's amazing. And today, your roles and responsibilities in the business, what does that look like?
So right now I have seven salespeople other than myself. Two of them are focused on small work. And in our world, small work is, sub $100,000. Anything, it could be 1,200 bucks, but maybe a hall bathroom remodel would fall into the small work. Something that doesn't have to go through a extensive design process. Um, that portion of the company represents about 3 million a year in revenue. So it's like churn and burn, lots of small contracts, a lot of stuff flying out the door. But the sales process is the same. It's abbreviated, but we're trying to handle things and send them through that pipeline the same way. The other five are focused on design, build, remodeling, and I have people that sell between 3 and 6 million a year each. So people's skill set vary, and the size and scope of the projects they sell vary. But the challenge is, how do we make sure those salespeople put together deliverables that the production team is happy with? And it's one of my core responsibilities is keep production happy. You guys probably see it in the landscape hardscape thing. A lot of companies have a hard time finding really nice camaraderie and synergy between sales and production, because sales goes out there and paints this beautiful rosy picture, makes promises that we could probably keep, but maybe not with the budget we gave them. Like, sure, we could do that, but you gave me two-thirds the amount of money I need to do it, is what you're going to hear from the project manager. So I'm fortunate enough to have a wonderful relationship with the two guys that run our production team, and being able to bridge that gap and keep that gap bridged is a big piece of my role.
That leads into our conversation. And when you first started there, my question to you is, were you a good salesperson, or is this something that you had to grow into and train yourself and kind of expand that?
That's a great question. Were you a good podcaster when you first started?
Don't listen to my first episodes.
Um, you know, it's salespeople are an interesting breed. I don't know that there's too many people that are naturally good at it. And I think the general consensus, if you surveyed a bunch of people, they would think people that are the most social, you hear people say he could sell water to a whale or ice to an Eskimo. Those are not the best salespeople, right? The best salespeople are the people who are the best listeners, and people who are empathetic, and people that can listen to a client and extract from them what the problem is they're trying to solve, not paint a rosy picture and sell them something they think they need, right? So I would say that most people that I'm close with, friends and family, from my teenage years on, would say that, oh, Lux is he'd be a great salesperson just because I'm social. I have to force myself to be different than me when I'm in the role of selling. All right. So training was critical. I worked with an incredible guy named Chip for the first 5 years, for once a month, an hour at a time, and he just drilled stuff into me, very psychology based. A lot of reading he gave me to do, and you just have to learn to adapt to different personalities. You have to learn to adapt to your role a little bit. You can't get too excited. You can't. I keep saying you can't paint these rosy pictures. You have to bring the problems forward. Like, people talk to us about remodeling, they're like, "Oh, I heard you guys are great." I said, "Yeah, we're great, but guess what? Your project's going to suck, because we're going to be in your house for 12 weeks. You and your spouse are going to want to kill each other. Something's going to show up that you liked and they didn't. You're going to blame us. Everybody's going to get fatigued halfway through. You're going to want us out of there. It sucks. It's remodeling. It's not cool." So nobody that you would think of as a natural salesperson is going to say that in the beginning. They're going to say, "This is going to be great. We're great. We check in every Friday. We have weekly meetings. We upload photos to the online thing." Like, that's all well and good, but you should just be doing that stuff anyway. So to answer your question, no, I do not feel I was a great salesperson in the beginning. I think the training was really critical, and the training is only as good as how much the person listens to it, absorbs it, and retains it, right?
Right.
And it's got to be frequent reminders. You can't touch base on this stuff once a month. You gotta read, you gotta listen, you gotta have a coach. It's something you gotta stay on top. It's like exercise.
Yeah.
You know, you can be a great tennis player and not play for a year. And don't expect to be a great tennis player on, July of next year.
Going off of what you said there, is there any specific resource book that if somebody wanting to improve their sales, or just like a tidbit of advice that would be like the biggest thing that they could just start to be more perceptive of, that would help them, is going back to your early days of becoming a salesperson?
Yep.
Any book resource that you would recommend, or any key tip?
I would say my favorite book that I've listened to, I'm listening to it now for the third time. Um, and I say listen to because the guy who voices it does such an incredible job. And voice and tone and pace are so important in sales communications that I think the way it's read is excellent. The name of the book is Never Split the Difference.
Mm.
It's written by a gentleman by the name of Chris Voss, Voss. Have you heard of this book?
Absolutely. Yeah.
He was an FBI hostage negotiator, incredibly well trained in psychology. The book, each chapter begins with the story of a hostage negotiation. And it describes the negotiation and how it went and what the results were, and then kind of analyzes that negotiation from a sales and business negotiation standpoint. And there's just a lot of great lessons in it. And like I said, I think listening to it's better than reading it. And I think listening to it once a year, if you want to be a successful salesperson, I think it's the one book I would repeatedly go through.
We want to take a break from today's episode to thank our sponsor, Cycle CPA. It's crucial to review your financial statements on a monthly basis so you can diagnose areas for improving your business's financial health early before they become significant issues. Too many contractors wait until the end of the year to review their financials as they file taxes, when it's often too late to take action to change the outcome. Cycle CPA not only handles bookkeeping and taxes, but they also ensure that you're armed with financial data on a monthly basis to make key business decisions. They offer benchmarking, cash flow forecasting, and assistance in developing targets for financial metrics. With their team of accountants specialized in the hardscape and landscape industry, they currently work with hundreds of companies in this field. Visit cyclecpa.com, and for $200 off, mention the How to Hardscape podcast. Now back to our episode. I asked you if you were a good salesperson when you start, and you pointed out a lot of really good key points, and I want to dive a little bit more into what makes a good salesperson. But before we do that, can you, or somebody who's trained in sales that can train other people in sales, can you take anyone and make them a good salesperson? Or is it a specific series of, personality traits that you can see that this person is going to be a good salesperson? They just need training.
There may be a uniformly accepted answer to that makes sense, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
In my heart, I'd like to believe that you can make anybody a decent salesperson. However, I think if you look at some different personality profiles, it may be difficult to get some people that are overly detail-oriented into it, because I think the details are something you have to be aware of. In your world, in our world, we're selling people a packaged solution, right? There's Pennsylvania Bluestone or Teco Block or Bonus Stone or whatever pavers, but there's also an irrigation system and a low voltage lighting system and stairs that have to have a certain riser height to go from one level of grade to another. There's a seepage bed. There's there's a million things that need to be put together. And for people to have confidence buying something like that from you for $150,000, $250,000, $350,000, you have to get to a point where you have a certain level of detail. But there are folks that also overanalyze things and maybe get too into the weeds. I think they would be the most difficult to convert into a great salesperson. And that's not a negative comment on those people. I just think sales requires you to be able to pivot pretty quickly.
Right.
And I think it's hard to pivot quickly if you're really type A about things. But because you want to understand why we're pivoting. And if we pivot, what's the solution going to be? And if we pivot here, what could go wrong over there? And sometimes overthinking that stuff, time kills deals. And if we just think too long and hard about things, I think we lose stuff. Um, People who are social, people who are driven, people who get up early, people who are calendar focused, uh, process oriented. If you can group those things, they may be able to excel without having all the necessary skills.
Mm-hmm.
You can teach those skills, but I think you have to have some fundamentals.
So what does make a good salesperson? You've already touched on a couple of things there, most importantly being an active listener, but what kind of key things kind of go into being a good salesperson?
Listening, I think, is number one. Somebody who doesn't talk a ton when they're in a sales role, right? Early on in my training, we talked about the difference between identity and role. And somebody in a sales position can maintain their identity. You don't have to change who you are, but you have to be able to change the role that you're playing. The man I am at home with my 9-year-old son or 7-year-old little girl is very different than the man I am sitting in somebody's kitchen talking about a $200,000 project. Me as a person is no different, right? My identity remains the same, but being able to separate and differentiate between your identity and your role, I think is a big one. Timely communication. We sell a lot of stuff because we communicate well. You reach out to us, you're gonna get an answer quick. The next steps are going to be clear. If we tell you we're going to show up, we show up. If we're going to be more than 5 minutes late, we call you. I think people are just looking for communication because the people that hire us and hire you guys and hire Oriole Landscape, they're busy, right? Like you don't have a couple just sitting around doing nothing that's going to blow $400,000 or Canadian dollars on their backyard, right? They got stuff going on. So when they have something they want to do and they reach out to 6 people and 2 of them take 2 weeks to get back to them, 2 of them never get back to them, one of them gets back to them and never shows up, and then one of them's this excellent communicator, you've set yourself apart tenfold, right off the bat. So I think timely communication and never really being off. I know that sounds unhealthy, right? But I can't turn it off. None of my salespeople turn it off. Everybody's 7 days a week. Not to say we're sitting at a desk for 5 hours on a Saturday, but if something comes through on a Saturday or Sunday, somebody's jumping on it. If there's a client issue on a weekend, we're jumping on it. We're jumping on things at night. There's a real drive that has to be there. The communication, the drive, and process. We mentioned earlier being process oriented. I don't think you can do a high volume of sales without a good process. You can be a great salesperson, but you need a process and you need some administrative help so that you can excel at the sales and not drown in the paperwork. And I think, and the last one really is being calendar focused. Everything's got to go on a calendar. It doesn't matter what it is. If I tell a guy I'm going to give him a ring back Friday after I hear back from the plumber about the thing, I need to put on my calendar at 7 a.m. just a big block that says, call Bill about the plumbing thing today, right? That's just, I have to do it because otherwise there's things going this way, things going this way. You're thinking about this, what's going on next week? I got to sell this thing today. She needs help with there's a million things going on. So I think really starting to get yourself dialed into a calendar is critical. I never had a calendar before I started my sales job.
Right.
And I don't know how I operated. Looking back, it's probably why it didn't work out.
Yeah, I hated managing a calendar, but it's amazing how I wouldn't be able to do this podcast without having a calendar as well as the landscaping business. You just need to keep on top of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a big one.
You talked about processes, and I want to ask you as a consultant, especially, you know, hiring a consultant's like being able to have somebody look at what you're doing, and you talked about processes, and being able to come in as like a third party is such a huge importance to be able to see and tweak things or implement things. What are some things that you look at as a consultant coming into a business, seeing a sales process, and able to see like common key things that stand out and are easily tweaked, or things that are just completely missing in that sales process that you're able to like guide them along that sales process way?
The first thing I'm going to look at is the lead intake process, right? Where are these leads coming from? Who do they go to? And how do we make sure we get them when they're warm, right? If there's a website inquiry form fill out thing or whatever, somebody's got to be watching that. Somebody who doesn't turn off their email at 5 o'clock. Somebody who's down with this thing ringing or buzzing or whatever it does to let you know you have an email on Saturday and Sunday, right? Because when these busy people find the time to inquire about this thing, the person who gets right on their schedule and gets back to them takes a huge leap to the front of the line. And not only do we want to get back to people quickly, we want to make a good first impression. The internal components of lead intake need to be focused on sales. This is not somebody at a front desk that writes a few things down and gives it to someone, right? We want that person to set up an appointment with the right person at a time that works for not only the prospect, but for the salesperson, right? Somebody says, we can only meet after 5 or on the weekends. Like, well, then we might not be the right company for you, because are you going to be able to have design meetings during the week, Monday through Friday? Because maybe us salespeople are motivated. I'll meet you on a Saturday morning, but the designer is not going to work on Saturday, So we want to make sure we're asking the right questions to make sure we have the right people. And we want to get that information early. And if we can figure out what's driving the reason to do this project, even at a very high level, before we get a salesperson engaged, we definitely want to do that. Because we don't want to set up, if say we have 50 new leads a month, we don't want to set up 50 appointments, right? We want to make sure we set up the 30 appointments that have the highest probability of working for us as a company, and making sure that we have people that are going to be partners in this process, right? We don't want to work for people. We want to work with them, right? And we want to establish that process mentality really early on. And that starts at lead intake. So that's the first thing we got to look at. We got to make sure our lead intake process is solid.
I want to ask you a little bit more on that. That's great. So with somebody reaching out, what kind of questions are you asking them to be able to understand that this could be a client of ours and we should go to the next step, or this is not the client for us?
Well, in the remodeling world, we're always looking for the pain, right? Why are they doing this project? So we're going to ask questions around that. And I mentioned my very first sales coach, Chip. He was famous for acronyms. He'd always come up with these little things that were weird that will never make it into any like real sales book, but they were Chip's things and they were great. So one of his things was epic BS, right? And we knew those as the reasons, the fundamental reasons why someone would do a not financially sound project, right? So if somebody puts 200 grand into their house is not worth 200 grand more. They should just buy 200 grand worth of municipal bonds. Like it would make a lot more sense. It's a lifestyle decision and they're doing it for a reason. And they're willing to lose money on the thing to do it. So epic BS. Embarrassment, right? The neighbors up the street just did this unreal kitchen and now everybody goes to their house for all the holidays and nobody comes here, right? That's a real thing. Like people will spend money to fix that. Privacy, right? Maybe the way that their house is, like the kids are just like running all around past the entrance to the bedroom, or maybe they have in-laws that live with them and they feel like they're just in each other's space, right? That would drive someone to do a project and spend some money on it. I is isolation. Say you have um, the rear from your perspective, say from the landscape and hardscape perspective. Say the only door to go to the outside is on the side of the house. And out back is this giant yard that the kids are always playing in. And the kitchen has a small window, and the mother or father just can't see the kids playing in the yard, right? They're separated, they're isolated. It's a problem. People will spend a lot of money to fix something like that. C is cramped, right? There's just not enough space, whether it's for the people, the stuff, the furniture, enough space to entertain. There's just not enough space. And then, so that's epic: embarrassment, privacy, isolation, cramped. B and S. B is the best one of all time. Greatest thing to sell to ever. Broken promise. All right. Most likely the men are at fault for this. I haven't heard a lot of stories where the woman was promising the man in the house they were going to do a project and it never happened. It's typically the other way around. Johnny's been telling Susie for 5 years they're going to put a pool in. And every summer it's another excuse. I didn't get this big a bonus as I wanted. We spent all this money on the kids' summer camp. We did this big vacay. We got to redo the roof. Every year that goes on, the broken promise gets heavier. And if you can expose that with, this sounds terrible. It just sounds like this is terrible. It sounds, but it's not. It's the way it is. So if you can expose a broken promise like that, you can easily just go in there and attack and sell. And then S is safety. Say there's a big deck on the back of the house and the railings are a little wobbly and they have young kids and the staircase is steep down to the yard. If it was just the couple and they were having people over for a barbecue and having drinks on the deck, it probably doesn't matter. But all of a sudden the safety of the kids is at play, right? So now they're willing to put a small staircase outside the back door to step down to the deck, to get the deck closer to grade, and then wider stairs with railings to get down into the yard, and outdoor lighting so people can see the steps. And that safety comes into play with elderly parents and in-laws. It could even come into play with somebody that had a knee surgery who's in their 30s. And now we got to do something to make sure, it's soft on his or her knees. So epic BS. If you can find ways to strategize questions in that lead intake to find out which one of those things is driving what they're doing, and you're getting great information.
Once you've identified which one it is, do you make a mental note of that or a note of that and use that through the sales process in certain language to hit on that pain point throughout the sales process? Or is that something that is kind of just reserved, and if you need to, you can kind of hit on those pain points some more?
Yeah, if we can get to the root of what the pain is, then we want to tailor some questions to have that person verbalize that pain, right? Because talking about pain is equally as painful as the pain, right? And there's it's probably not a metaphor. I don't know what the right word is for it, but suppose you had a real bad toothache, right? And you go to the dentist and you're like, this thing hurts like hell. And he's like, well, you're going to need a root canal. You're not going to be like, well, before we do that, let's establish what it's going to cost. You're going to be like, great, do the root canal. Get this thing to stop hurting, right? You would never go there and you might be like, early signs of a cavity. And you would be like, hey, what's the cost for a root canal, right? Because there's no real pain. So we want to tailor our questions to figure out, number one, how long have they been dealing with this pain, right? If they can't see the kids in the other part of the backyard, how long's that been going on for? Because if it's been going on for 2 years and little Johnny's gotten hurt 3 times in those 2 years, and what do they have to do to resolve that? Oh, little Johnny had to get a cast on his one arm. He missed 2 weeks of summer camp. Mom had to stay home from work because he couldn't go to summer camp. Now you're like, oh my goodness, like not doing this has cost you guys an immense amount of money and stress. But we would never know that if we don't uncover the pain and ask questions about it. So we want to know how long it's been going on, what have they tried to do to fix it, and what does it cost them to try to fix it. And then right after we find all that stuff out, then we ask, what are they willing to invest to fix it? Right? Which solves the other biggest problem that all salespeople have, which is getting a budget out of people.
We want to take a break from today's episode to thank Moser for sponsoring. I just got my hands on a Moser 2 Pro, and we'll be using this a lot this year for our estimating and design process. It is a measure and capture device that will measure, draw, calculate areas, perimeters, volume, elevations, and lay out the entire project on our device. I'm going to be bringing it on every consultation to measure the dimensions and elevation of the entire project, export it to my design software, and have a working terrain map to begin my designs from, as well as to become more accurate in my quoting process. The Moser 2 Pro is going to save me a ton of time and from having to make rough hand notes while taking these measurements in the field. Instead, Moser does all of that for me. If you want to get your hands on a Moser 2 Pro, use the promo code X8Hardscape. That's X, the number 8 Hardscape at Moser.com, or simply click the link in the show notes. Now back to our episode. Actually, my next question, how do you go about that? Because that's still something that I struggle with asking clients. And I think the way I see it is a lot of people are reserved on telling you their budget because they maybe have been screwed by another contractor that knew their budget and then was like, oh yeah, we can, maximize that, not necessarily give them all the value that comes with that. But I that's just my thought process on why people are so reserved on giving their budget. But how do you go about getting the budget from them?
Well, that can get deep, right? I think there's layers and layers to that. If we just kind of went through a general exam, right? So I come over to your place and we figure out that we got to clear all these bushes and trees in the backyard because we can't see what's going on, and we want to put a fence up around the back because the deer keep eating all the rhododendron or whatever. And we talk about how long this has been going on, and I say, so Mike, what are you guys willing to invest to do this? Like how far do you want to go? Because we could design a very, very simple solution and maybe take care of something for you through our small work group in the next 4 to 5 weeks. I mean, this doesn't have to be overly complicated if that's what you're looking for. Or do you want to really try to achieve something new out there? Then you may say, well, we are really looking for the opportunity to rethink the backyard. One of the most powerful things you can use is third-party stories, right? We'll get a little more to that in a minute, but you could say, all right, Mike, well, if you want to rethink it, have you guys thought about what you're willing to invest in this thing? And 99 out of 100 people are like, we really have no idea. What they are telling you is they have no idea what it costs. That doesn't mean they don't have an idea what they're willing to spend on it, right? So you say you have no idea. They're like, well, Mike, we've done stuff like this. Like I said, on the simple end of things. And we had a client over in Toronto who had a similar situation. And I don't know if they spent 20 to 30,000 bucks, and they ended up with a small patio with a little cafe table for coffee, and we redid some landscaping, and they felt like a little better sense of privacy, and they still want to do a bigger project down the road, but some immediate needs got fixed. We've also done stuff like this for people who are really willing to rethink things. We actually did one not too long ago in Nova Scotia, another Canadian place. And those folks were ready to go, and they spent $275 on their yard just to solve a couple problems. But do you think you're on one end of that range or the other? So now you've established brackets, right? 25 to 275, right? Which is a really insane range to throw at somebody. But now there's two numbers they've heard, right? So they said, well, he's going to be like, well, we're definitely not the 275 guy. We weren't even thinking close to that. He'd be like, oh, well, are you the 25 guy? I'm like, no, I mean, we could spend more than 25. Like, all right, if we came up with a solution for you that was like 75 to 150, would that be more comfortable? Then they'd be like, well, yeah, I mean, we probably would be on the lower end of that, but like that range works. But all right, so if I wrote up a design agreement that said 75 to 125, is that something you'd want to work on with us to come up with a solution for this stuff? And they're like, yeah, that'll work. There you go. You got their budget.
That
But
makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a difficult thing to do until you've done it a bunch
Right.
because everybody is weird to talk about money,
Yeah.
you know? And if a salesperson can get themselves comfortable talking about money, it's going to go a long way.
Okay, so you've said this word multiple times, and I want to know if it's purposeful or especially when you're
Ooh,
talking to a client.
this is
Uh,
interesting.
you said invest. You didn't say
Yes,
spend. You didn't say how much are you willing to spend? How much do you think it is going to cost? You said how much are you willing to invest? Is that purposeful? Is that
that
what
is
you talk
very,
about?
very intentional.
Okay. And why
Yeah.
is that?
Because cost implies that you're spending money and the money's gone, right? How much does gas cost? How much does bread cost? We talk about cost when we talk about things like commodity items. We talk about investing when we think about things that are long term, right? Um, like no one would ever say, how much did it cost to put money into your 401k? Or like it's not a cost because it has an intrinsic return down the road, right? It's an investment. So people who are doing these things to their houses and to their property are doing so that their life can be better. And we can't view that through the lens of financial investment, but you can view it through the lens of investing in your family and your friends and entertaining with people and feeling better when you get home from an arduous day of work. It's so yeah, invest is very intentional. Yeah, it's very rare that I would use the word cost unless somebody said, like, how much does a square foot of Wissahickon schist stone cost? Like if we're talking about a product or something, but anytime we're talking about a design build package solution to something, it's invest.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. We talked about the lead intake. After that, what are you looking at when it comes to a business and their sales process?
Want to look at how people schedule appointments. So when in that lead intake process, we establish a time that somebody's going to come out there, and we want a calendar appointment to go out. We want inside that calendar appointment it to be very clear how long the appointment is, 1 until 2 o'clock. We want to make sure that appointment has a clear agenda in it, and that agenda is written in such a way that we obtain one of the two outcomes that we want at the end. And we want that agenda to also say, like, what are the next steps? So after this meeting, we're going to schedule another meeting to review the budget we've established and if you're comfortable moving into design. So we want to use that appointment scheduling process to clearly and concisely explain to these folks who have no clue, and this isn't critical of them, people have no idea what they're doing when they call somebody like you or us, right? Like, we have this dream and I want it to look like this picture. And they have no clue what that takes. So we have to coach them through the process, set clear next expectations, and then follow through on those and make sure we're on time and make sure we do what it said in that calendar invite. Because now we've also established, once again, we're doing what we say we're going to do, right? And every time we do that, the rapport grows deeper and the trust grows deeper, and we get ourselves closer to selling something. So once we get the lead intake thing figured out, then we want to make sure that scheduling thing's figured out. And we want to make sure that we can clearly communicate what our process is to the client so that they can follow our process. I don't want to go to Billy and Jenny's house and have them walk me all over the house and talk about all they want to do and tell me what color cabinets they want because it doesn't matter, right? This is how we're doing it. And if you want to work with a professional group that will guide you through something that you would otherwise be a deer in the headlights, this is the process we're going to follow.
Now, is that process like an email? Because you mentioned like the lead intake, get them on the phone, and at what point do you kind of move towards like email communication? Because it can be a lot of information, especially when you're detailing your process, and you might not want to, you know, talk with them on the phone about that entire process. Maybe they'll forget it and so on and so forth. At what point do you kind of move towards like email communication to really detail that process out, show them where they're at in the process and so on and so forth?
We don't want to go too far ahead of whatever the next step is when we're early on in this sales process, right? So when the phone call comes in, whoever's doing the lead intake, we want them to clearly explain what's involved in the first appointment. And that after that first appointment, if you're comfortable, we'll schedule a second one. That's all they need to know. And then when the salesperson is out at the first appointment, we want them to clearly explain what happens at the second appointment. And at the end of that second appointment, should they want to move forward, this is what they do. So we never want anybody wondering what happens next. Because then when they find out what happens next, they have to like process it all and like figure out if it makes sense. But if they know what's going to happen next and you're meeting them in a week and a half, they can think about it for a week and a half before they come see it. You know, and we can shorten that sales cycle a little bit. We don't want to let people walk out door and have to think about things.
That makes sense. And then my next question is, how, at what point is the salesperson as the company representative explaining why, or maybe not even explaining, but displaying why that client should hire that company? This is something I ask because I personally struggle with this. In the past, I, you know, got that lead. Either talk to them on the phone, or what I'll do nowadays is I'll email them what a typical project that they're talking about would typically cost. And I email them because I want to include my process of how I install so that they can kind of understand, oh, company A is, you know, much cheaper, but this company, my company, they're actually showing me and communicating with me these steps. And I don't want to do that over the phone because it's a lot. And I also like to include links to my YouTube videos for each of those steps so that they can see my face, see what I'm doing, and so on and so forth. So that's how I've gone about communicating that value in my company, because we're not, you know, haven't been in business for more than 10 years and have that reputation established and so on and so forth. All that to say, Chris, where is the salesperson kind of communicating that company value through this process, especially when it comes down to eating up that client's time in that consultation?
So would you say that you come typically at a more premium price point than some other folks in your line of work?
Absolutely.
Okay. So it will be difficult for someone who has never done a project like this to justify working with you, right?
Yep.
Because they don't know any better. They don't know. Like this
Yep.
guy was less expensive. This guy, they haven't been through a design build process. They don't recognize that you may be thinking through things like, you know, outdoor lighting, running extra circuits out here in case they had a shed down the road. Like you're thinking through this stuff because you have the experience. So, you know, we talk about the pain and the reason why people do these projects. We can go to another level of pain. So those pains we talked about, the epic BS. We call those type 1 pains, the reason why people would do this project. Type 2 pain is the reason they would do it with us. Okay. So in the remodeling world, there are alternatives to working with us. You could do it yourself. You could hire the less expensive guy. You could have Uncle Jimmy do it on Saturdays for 6 months. And until somebody has tried one or more of those alternatives, they will likely not see the value in working with us. So you could ask questions on the lead intake, such as, have you done any large landscape or hardscape projects before, maybe here at a previous house? And if they say no, right off the bat, this one's going to be harder for you, right? And if they say, oh, yeah, we have, like, oh, what type of project did you do? Why are we doing another one? And then maybe like, oh, well, we moved. Oh, where'd you move from? Oh, we were just 15 minutes down the road. Oh, who did the previous project? Ah, you know, Canadian landscape guy, whatever. Like, well, why don't you hire him again if you were happy with the project? Like, wow, like they didn't wet lay the bluestone. We had like puddles in the patio, and it took 4 months. They told us it's going to take 6 weeks. You're like, oh, Jesus, sounds terrible. But how long ago did you do this project? Just 2 years ago. Oh, man, did you get a good price on it? Like, well, yeah, like the price was good. So now you're just getting them to open up on why they're not calling Canadian landscape guy again, right? They have a reason to work with you now. They may say, "Oh yeah, we did a big patio at our last place, and my husband and his buddies did it on the weekend, and they drank 3 cases of Molson and 2 cases of Labatt Blue watching ice hockey. The thing's all crooked. You go you go in the backyard, you look at it, it's not even square off the house. The fire pit's not a circle, it's like a semicircle. It's like it worked out fine and it served us well in our younger years, but we're older and professional now. Our kids are getting grown, we have a little extra money. We want to do it right. We're thrilled that you want to do it right because we invest a lot more time in the planning process to make sure we get it right. So it sounds like we could be a good fit. Should we set up a time to get together and check it out? Right. But so you got type 1 and type 2 pain. If people have never done this stuff before, it is much harder for you or me to sell them something expensive.
If it is that type 1 pain, because I would say typically most of our clients, unless they're repeat business, have not done a hardscape project at their house.
Yep.
Because if they don't move, usually it's just done once, unless it needs to be redone again. And then that comes down to type 2 pain. That type 1 pain, what would you suggest in terms of that communication is to, differentiate yourself against other contractors that might be lower in price there?
Well, the guys that are lower in price, what's missing from them that you guys are doing? The answers might be clear, but what do you think is missing?
Typically less base material, that would be like the most typical thing. Installation practice based would be the usual thing that we kind of lean on there.
Are there differences between you and them in the operations of the business and not so much in the finished product?
There's also, service based. I kind of key into that as well, and that I am more customer service related oriented, but it's difficult. The way I look at it is it's more difficult for me to say that to them because then they need me to come on a consult and actually see that and see how relationally I am and actually speak to them and see them in person versus leaning more so in that initial like phone call, email. Hey, this is how we install our projects, because I can actually just list it out and link those videos to them.
So when you list out how you install your projects, you are largely doing paver patios. Like, is that a lot of what you do?
Yeah, paver patios, retaining walls.
Okay. So you could ask, have other folks provide you any spec sheets on their installation practices,
Okay.
right? And if they say, actually, no, right? Because, if they don't provide any of that and you do,
Yeah.
you are providing information that in theory they don't need, right?
Gotcha.
So, so you're 15 grand, he's 13 and he's 11.
Yeah.
The 11 and 13 guy haven't told them how they're doing it, but it
Right.
still says they're using the same product, right? 9 out of 10 people don't know there's a difference between a 4-inch setting base and a 6-inch setting base, and 9 out of 10 people don't know what a plate compactor is, right? They don't know. People don't know there's a difference between sand and polymeric sand.
Right.
They just don't know. So giving them that information might not help.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
But if you ask questions about what other information they've obtained and you kind of get those wheels turning, then they go ask those guys. Now all of a sudden they're seeing a justification in your number, right? So,
I like that.
what kind of footings do you get? Hey, out of curiosity, you have somebody else look at this stuff, I hope, because you should always get 1 or 2 people to look at it. Have they alluded to what they do for their footings for their retaining walls? And like, what do you mean? What's a footing? Like, well, we can't have the frost heave like lifting up your walls. So we want to make sure that from an engineering standpoint, we're prepping the base under the walls properly. And I'm like, oh, I thought you just like set the block on the ground. You're like, no, you can't just set the block on the ground. But for your own interest, when you talk to these other guys, just make sure you understand what their specifications are, because there are different ways to do this stuff. And we have a hard time going apples to apples people with just on numbers, but when we get into the brass tacks of how this stuff is happening, most people we work with us because they appreciate what we're doing beneath the surface that you don't see when you're having your little cocktail party and your Hawaiian pizzas and stuff.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Ask questions, and I'm going to start implementing that right away. I love it.
Yeah, don't tell them too much.
Got it.
It's not helping.
Got it.
The smartest people in the world, you get a Harvard PhD that wants to put a patio on, you tell them what the sub base is, it isn't helping them.
Gotcha.
It's he's just trying to get a task accomplished. He's got 3 guys that told him, I'm going to do this patio with this retaining wall with these lights. And he's picking one based on who was nice and the number.
God.
So if it, and it goes back to the very beginning, listening and being empathetic and asking open-ended questions, right? We don't want to just tell them too much.
We want to take a break from today's episode to thank our sponsor, Knowledge Tree Consulting. They are efficiency consultants in the industry with 35 plus years of industry experience building Oriole landscaping in Toronto, which they are completely hands off at this point. George and Peter have been on the podcast before, and George, on multiple occasions now, I've personally leaned on him to help with the How to Hardscape headquarters software and how we can maximize the efficiency of user experience. And I know the guys at DTE Landscaping, Chuck and Jeffrey, who we've also had on the show multiple times, have hired them on in the past. Check out their consulting services, peer groups, and events that are coming up on their website, knowledgetreeconsulting.com, or check them out on Instagram at joinktc. Now back to our episode.
Perfect. Lead intake process, scheduling, anything else in terms of looking at another business and improving their process?
I think a lot of people move too quickly to the presentation, right? Like, here, we came up with this design and here's the price. I think we got to do what we just talked about. We got to ask the right questions. We got to make sure in that sales process, we're getting to the root of why we're doing the project. And we don't want to spend a lot of time putting presentations together without a clear understanding of what people are willing to invest, right? So you got the lead intake, you got the appointment scheduling, we figured out the pain. If there's type 2 pain, we figured it out. We really, really, really got to get aligned on what people are willing to invest, because if we don't, we're going to go through a design process, which takes time and resources and mental energy, and we're not going to convert them to production. And that is just a big old Debbie Downer for everybody at the office, right? The higher those conversion rates are from design to production, the happier people are at work.
Got it.
People are fulfilled. You got a lot of these design build companies, whether it's houses or landscape, hardscape, you have creative individuals that are designing things and get great satisfaction out of seeing them get built. It's in their nature, right? They're trying to create something for someone. They develop these relationships. They love the client. They love the stone they picked. They can't wait to see it built. They can't wait to get professional photos. They're going to invite us over for a cocktail party. And then the people are like, we're not doing it. It's too much money. It just takes the wind right out of their sails, So we got to get aligned on budget. And once you get there, I mean, if you have the pain and you have the budget, you should be able to succeed, right? And you should be able to set with your experience or anybody else's experience in your field or that you're working with or that's been on this podcast. You should have enough experience to say, those people have $125,000. Design something that fits in $125,000. And you show them what works within the budget. And you can say to them, hey, we can do more than this. We can show you things that cost more as a stone or as a retaining wall, but we're being respectful where you told us you want it to be. If you want to see things that could push this up, we're happy to show it to you. If you want us to play the budget police, just let us know, and we'll keep you right where we talked about. And if you do those things, you should be able to sell quite a bit.
At what point through the sales process are you managing expectations with the client? You brought up an example earlier about like home remodeling. We're going to be in your house for 12 weeks. You're going to hate us, blah, blah, blah. It's probably not something I would assume you'd want to like immediately talk to them about as soon as they're on that initial phone call. But you don't want to kind of scare them away from you from like
Yep.
maybe a contractor that's lower price and is not telling them these things. So just for that as an example of managing expectations, when through the sales process are you talking to them about things like this?
I think you have to manage expectations the whole time,
Okay.
and it's different all the time. When you're going to get into a design process, you know, George knows, the oil guys know, they know if there's going to be some zoning thing or you're going to have to deal with the municipality because there's too much coverage and you're going to need a seepage bed. You got to tell people that early on, right? It can't be a surprise that we need to manage the stormwater. Like we're professionals, we need to know that. When you get into a design process, this is a pretty straightforward patio, retaining walls, a set of stairs down to the pool. Usually we get this design work done in 2 to 3 weeks. So if you just put it in your head that it's going to be 4 weeks before we sit down and review this stuff, you won't be disappointed, right? Any opportunity you have to set an expectation that you can meet or exceed, you're setting yourself up for success. Because the first time you say, we're going to get this to you by next Friday, and they don't have it next Friday, you're just taking yourself out of the running. You're dealing with professional people, and you know the the cardiac surgeon research guy that's supposed to have his thing into the executive medical director by Friday can't not get it there by Friday. Like their professional world is deadline driven too. So when you tell people you're going to do something, get it to them on time or early, and every time you do that, you just build deeper trust with people. So to answer your question, I think the managing expectation thing starts in the very beginning. You don't want to like overdo it, but get into design, let them know. This is usually about how long it takes. And if that's going to change or that's going to push out, we're going to let you know as soon as we know, and then confront bad news immediately. If you hear back from the township, hey, I know this is what we wanted to do. Looks like we kind of can't do it. We didn't want to like rain on your parade or anything, but we want to tell you now before we go any further. And maybe we can sit down and huddle and figure out how to modify this thing so we don't have to have such a mountain to climb here. Getting in front of bad news quick is huge. When you get around to sitting down with a proposal with people, when you get final numbers together, call them a week or a couple days in advance. Hey, I know we're getting together Thursday. We're just about done wrapping this up. We had a budget of 100 to 125. We're at 132 right now. We have a couple plugs in there. I just didn't want you to come in here and get shocked. We can find ways to tighten this thing up if we need to. And just I didn't want to I want to surprise you. Yeah. There's an old saying, surprise is the enemy of yes. That's a good one to write down.
I like that.
So I think there's opportunities to set expectations all the time, but you have to set realistic ones that you can meet. We don't want to set expectations for the sake of making the client smile when they leave the current meeting at the risk of having them pissed at the next one.
Yeah. At what point is the sales kind of like when you hand off to production now, the client's ready to go? Is it just salesperson hands off, wipes his hands, done with it? Or are you communicating with the client still throughout that process?
Yeah, we'd like our salespeople to stop by every job. I mean, most of our jobs average, 10 to 16 weeks in duration. We'd like the salesperson to be there every other week. Just pop in, make sure they're visible. The salesperson is the first person that this client trusted, right? So you establish trust in the beginning, and if you kind of leave when it goes into production, people are like, oh, what happened to Chris? Where'd he go? There's also opportunities when you stop by during production to hear some issues they may have that they're not so comfortable sharing with the guys in the field because they may view the guys in the field as not part of the problem. Maybe something's not turning out the way they expected. Well, the guy that's laying the block, like that's not he didn't order the stone, or the wall caps a different shade than they thought they were going to be. They're not going to, tell the guy in the field they're all pissed about it, and they might bottle it up and they might let it go. And then at the end of the day, they're not totally thrilled. So I think stopping by during production lets you get those venting sessions out as soon as possible. We'd always rather hear the complaints first than them share complaints with their friends over the weekend. Like, oh, we're doing this patio and, the wall caps are a little different than what we ordered, and I don't think it matches perfect. And she's like, oh my God, are you serious? When we did that project at our house, the wall caps matched, and we made it change all the wall. And then we fired our builder, and then the girl's like, John, when Jenny and Mike did their project, the wall caps were wrong, and they fired the guy. You have no idea what's going on in the background, right? So I think stopping by the projects, you got to get in front of these things. And so many people don't feel comfortable bringing issues to the guys that are there doing the work. It's the easiest way to upsell people too. They've already gotten over the hump of writing these big checks. You go out there and be like, guys, why did we not do low voltage lighting? Why did we not uplight all these crepe myrtle trees? Like, do you guys want to do that? Like, the electrician's going to be here next week. You want me to get a price for uplighting? Or if you feel like you're at your max, it's cool. I'm just saying now's the time to do it. Gives you an opportunity to upsell. And at the very end of it, you want to be able to go over there and celebrate the completed product and ask for referrals. There's nothing easier to sell than somebody whose best friend told them you're the best.
Chris, I knew we would run out of time before we ran out of questions here, but this has been awesome. I'm taking away things. Anyway. Where can our audience find out more about you and anything that you've got going on? Where can our audience learn more?
Sure. I got a really simple web page. I didn't want to overdo it. It's just a landing page. You can get a hold of me if you want to. It's chrisluxconsults.com. So CHRISLUX consults.com. Real simple. I'm an email guy. I'm always on. I'll get back to you quick. We've worked with Oriole, who you're friendly with. We're working with George's consulting company now, Knowledge Tree, which is fun. We're putting together a pretty neat package for them to kind of dive into all this stuff. And some people just need not a shoulder to cry on, but some people just need like an hour conversation every couple months. Like, hey, this is what we're doing. Any advice? Great. Some people may want to dive into a 12-week consulting project that fine tunes all this stuff. I'm pretty malleable. Whatever, we're going to find the pain and find the budget. And then awesome. Do some consulting and fix some problems. That's the whole idea. It's been great, Mike. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, Chris, thanks so much for your time. That's chrisluxconsults.com. That's going to be in our show notes for our audience listening there. Chris, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mike. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. Go check out Chris's website, chrisluxconsults.com, Lux, Lux. And I hope you found that episode helpful for your sales process. And if you're looking for something to dive into this off season to help your business streamline processes within your business, check out the How to Hardscape headquarters software, where we help you budget, estimate job cost, time track, schedule, and so much more. You can check it out at hthheadquarters.com. And once again, I appreciate you listening into the How to Hardscape podcast. If you do find value in it at all, I'd really appreciate a rating, review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening to this podcast, or send me a message at How to Hardscape with anything that you found helpful here. And before we leave, I want to say thank you to our sponsors.
Cycle CPA. If you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. And Knowledge Tree Consulting, if you're looking for efficiency consultants who have a lot of experience in our industry, check out Knowledge Tree Consulting at knowledgetreeconsulting.com. And thank you to Mosier for jumping on board to sponsor the How to Hardscape podcast. I just got my hands on a Mosier 2 Pro, and I'll be using it to measure, draw, calculate areas, perimeters, volume, elevations, and lay out the entire project on my device and for estimating and design process. And we look forward to meeting with you next week on the How to Hardscape podcast.